Learning Curves and Coffee, where we skip the perfection, spill the real, and talk parenting, teaching, and personal growth over a hot cup. I'm Ivory, a mother, edupreneur, and your caffeinated co-pilot through the meltdowns, meetings, and magical moments. Let's get into it. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are listening. Hey, y'all, welcome back. I want to unpack something today that a lot of parents don't say out loud. At least I've never heard of parents say. And it's something I have been reflecting on a lot for myself. And that is, I miss the old version of myself. And I think that there are a lot of parents walking around grieving versions of themselves. They never got to properly maybe grow into, finish out a particular season, or even say goodbye to or close a chapter of. Maybe there was a part of your identity that you enjoyed and you loved, part of your lifestyle that you basked in, that becoming a parent, and particularly a parent of a neurodiverse child, quite frankly, stripped you of. It minimized, it went away, and nobody talks about the grief that comes with that, at least not publicly, right? We talk about advocating for our kids, supporting our kids, helping our kids thrive. I'm the first to say that I am at the forefront of those conversations, and they are vital conversations. But how often are we asking, who are we becoming while raising our children? Because parenting, especially parenting neurodiverse children, it changes you. It either is going to change you for the better ultimately, and it can. I know for some of us, especially in those hard moments, it sounds crazy when I say that, but it can and it does, and it had for me. And oftentimes it can change you in not so good ways, right? It can make you resentful. It can make you angry. It can make you isolate yourself, right? And if you are not aware and conscious of the ways that it is impacting you, it doesn't just change your schedule. It doesn't just change your finances. It doesn't just impact your sleep, which it certainly does impact all of those three things on a very high level. It changes your identity. And I think a lot of parents quietly feel guilty about admitting that. I know for me, I had Khalil when I was 30 years old. And I think back on the time before Khalil often, for many reasons, but throughout my 20s, I had freedom to explore my career, grow in my career, hang out and go out with girlfriends, date, and do all of the things that 20-year-olds do to learn and grow and mess up, the heartbreaks, the messy moments, the, mistakes at work, and the growing pains that come with evolving as a 20-year-old and learning who you are and who you want to become and growing into that space. And while I felt like maybe in terms of maturity, I was ready to be a mother, and I wanted Khalil, planned for Khalil, there was, and I didn't realize until after, that there was still so much unfinished business with my own life before becoming a parent that I did not get to complete, right? And that's not to say that I won't be able to, and that I haven't been able to do some new and cool things since becoming a parent. But there is something that I really miss about the identity I had prior to becoming a mom. I'm not one of those type of parents who believes that my child is, my entire world, and that my life revolves around him, and that my life became better because of my son. I don't believe that. I don't subscribe to that. I fundamentally believe that parents should have a life that is unique from being a parent if you can prior to, but if becoming a parent, you should have that. And if you can't, because some of us have children earlier, or because some of us have not figured out what we want our lives to be or feel like before having a kid, it's important to begin to create that while becoming a parent and creating space for independency for your child so that one day you have more time for your own life, right? That to me is essential. And so we're going to all talk about some ways in which I've learned to do that. But I remember a season, I want to say maybe 5 years ago, almost at this point, where I looked up one day and I realized I had become almost entirely consumed by survival mode. And I'll be honest, it wasn't just becoming a parent. It wasn't just raising Khalil. It was also learning how to let go of unhealthy relationships in my life and building healthy relationship with myself, and having to grieve, learning how to become a single mother. All of those things were happening at a very particular moment, losing very important people in my life. And so from the outside, I looked functional. I'm still working. I'm still growing in my career. I was an assistant principal. I'm leading folks. I put that in quotations because when I look back on my time as a school leader, now that I do coaching and consulting, I made tons of mistakes. But nevertheless, I showed up and I did my best. I'm still parenting every day with a child who was 3, 4 years old, newly diagnosed with autism, and still showing up professionally. But internally, honey, I was exhausted in ways that I didn't even know how to explain. Every conversation started to revolve around therapy appointments, school meetings, not just with Khalil's school, but also my own work. Right? Routines, emotional regulation, like learning all of this language around autism that I did not know. Even being an educator, I still had to learn new things as a parent, worrying about the future, right? And somewhere inside of all of that, like, I disappeared. Ivory, before I was a mother who was, I'll be honest, a bit more carefree, a bit more ambitious, a bit more soft-hearted, and willing and open to new people and new experiences, right? Again, incredibly ambitious, right? And big dreamer. Those things slowly started to dissipate. Not completely, but enough for me to notice. I'm a creative. I love interior design. I love house decor. I love to express myself through my clothing, right? Those things started to slowly disappear. I like to try new foods. I like to try to cook new things. I noticed those things were going away. And I remember thinking, when was the last time I did something that did not involve or revolve around a responsibility? And when was the last time I felt light and I just did something just because it was fun to do, not for end result? And honestly, that realization not only made me emotional and sad for myself, but it made me angry and it made me resentful, because what I also know is that it doesn't have to be either or as a parent. You can do both. And I think that for me, I was not given the experience to be able to both be a parent and still enjoy parts of my identity as an independent person. And that's the key too. I'm incredibly independent. I like to do things for myself and by myself more often than not. And being a parent robbed me of that in a lot of ways. So that was much of the reason why I picked up everything in Chicago and moved back to my hometown of Kansas City, because I was like, I am slowly slipping away. And I think this hits differently for a lot of parents, but for Black women specifically, many of us, we're raised with this unspoken expectation, and sometimes it's explicitly said, to be strong and to handle it and to push through and to keep functioning despite how you feel. And actually, you're taught in many ways that feelings are irrelevant. And I'm laughing because it's actually ridiculous to do that to a human being, but that is how we are taught to survive. And I can understand that given the world that we live in, where our survival is actually not warranted, if you will. So even when we're drowning emotionally, we still know how to answer the emails, show up to the meetings, make appointments, advocate at school, and smile publicly. Sometimes we even say, I'm okay, even when we're not, right? I made a point to stop doing that, by the way. And I usually am like, if I'm not okay, I'm going to say I'm hanging in there, because I'm always going to be hanging in there and I'm never going to complain. But if I'm not okay, I'm not going to say I'm okay, right? The first key is to being honest with your emotions. So, meanwhile, internally, while you're feeling completely depleted, you're realizing the dangerous part about functioning while emotionally exhausted is that people assume you're okay. And sometimes you start assuming you're okay too. We know what the research consistently shows us, that parents of autistic and neurodiverse children experience significantly high levels of chronic stress, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion than many other parenting populations. We know this because we advocate a lot. We anticipate problems, and we are trying to figure out how to regulate ourselves while regulating our child. Not only do we know this, I talk about it on the podcast regularly, right? That's just not parenting. That's sustained emotional management. And one of the things that I wrote in the Transformative Parent Playbook is that some parents are not grieving just their child. They're grieving the version of themselves that existed before survival mode. It's a thing. A part of you does die. A part of you transitions out. A part of your identity shifts, if you will, because a part of your identity shifts, if you will. And that's the part many parents feel ashamed to admit. We miss the spontaneity. We miss the rest. We miss the ease. We miss the freedom. We miss the quiet. We miss the relationships. We miss the confidence. We miss the emotional capacity. Actually, I'll take the emotional capacity piece back because my emotional capacity has expanded. But the other things definitely I miss deeply. And not because we love our children less, but because caregiving changes you profoundly. I want to root this in the discovery, acceptance, and embracing framework so that you all can understand this from a practical level. When you are in a space of grief and you want to transition out, and you are missing because you missed the old version of yourself, discovery asks, who was I before survival mode? What did I enjoy? What made me feel grounded? What parts of myself have disappeared underneath responsibility? And let me just say this, you are allowed to notice your exhaustion without feeling guilty about it, okay? Both things can exist. Acceptance is realizing I can pour endlessly from, I cannot pour endlessly from depletion. because many parents think self-sacrifice is proof of love. But eventually, your body starts keeping the score, as the book says. The irritability, the numbness, the resentment, the exhaustion, the emotional shutdown. That is all information, and you can only suppress that for so long. You can only fake it for so long. And actually, those feelings are not failure. Like, recognizing them allows you to, it gives you a roadmap, or maybe you need to reroute and go the other way, right? And then lastly, in the embracing phrase, you begin to say, I deserve support too. Not after burnout, not after collapse, not after I completely lose myself. Have you ever had that thought, like, I need to do something before I lose my mind? I need to go take a break. I need to take a long-term break. I need to, get out of here. That's why I say, like, your emotions are information. It's nothing to be ashamed of, because it's actually telling you what your next step should be. Now, this is where we stop romanticizing struggle and start prioritizing regulation and calmness and softness, if you will, and boundaries and recovery, right? And so, as we end out, here are some practical ways that you can begin to reconnect with yourself. Stop measuring your worth by productivity. It's not what you do, it's who you are. Just being is enough, right? Grieve honestly without shame. Some parents skip grief because they think it means they're rejecting their child. I felt that before too, but you are a full actualized human being, and you were before your child was here. You can grieve. It doesn't. You can deeply love your child and still mourn how much your life has changed. Number 3, reconnect with one forgotten part of yourself. This is my favorite. What did you used to enjoy that you slowly stopped doing and that you miss? Was it music? Was it reading? Was it walking? Was it something creative? Was it a particular friendship? Start small and go from there. Yeah. I started walking again. I started reading again, and those small things really have helped. Build emotional honesty into your life, right? Again, as I mentioned, when someone is asking, how are you? If you're not okay, don't feel compelled to say I'm okay. Be honest. You can say, I'm overwhelmed. I'm tired, child. I do need some support with some things. And I understand sometimes when you tell people that, they don't always want to hear it because they may have their own stuff. And that's okay, because oftentimes you're not saying it for them to respond or to provide help. You're saying it because they ask you, and you're honoring your truth. More often than not, I'll say, I am hanging in there, because that's always going to be true. More often than not, I am going to say, I cannot complain, because that will always be true, right? Stop performing strength. Also stop performing strength constantly. Some of us became so good at coping publicly that nobody realizes we're struggling privately. I'm really not a fan of when people are like, oh, you're so strong. I'm not trying to be strong. I'm strong because I have to. I would rather not have to be. And so that goes back to why it's important to be honest with your emotions. Both can be true. I can be overwhelmed and strong. I can need support and I'm frustrated. And last but not least, I said this more often than not, and this is something I feel like I was leaning into for a while and then reverted back for, I think, some valid reasons, but still I'm always going to push myself in this area. And so I'm going to remind you all as well, let yourself receive care. This one is hard for many parents, again, myself included, especially as hyper-independent parents, again, myself included. But healing requires support. Sometimes it may need to be from people that are not as close to you so that you feel safe or letting go in the triggers and the traumas are not bumping up against each other with family and friends, but sometimes it can and should be people who are close to you. You can decide that. But healing does require support. So please find that in one way or the other. And this is one of the reasons, honestly, like I started the podcast and I started to write about my experience through the Substack and the playbook because I wanted to give a voice to our experience. And so I want to leave parents with this. You are not failing because you are tired. And you are not weak because this parenting experience changed you. That is actually what it's designed to do. And you are not selfish for acknowledging that being a parent and caregiver can feel emotionally heavy. Some of the most loving parents I know are also the most exhausted. And maybe part of healing is finally telling the truth about that. I'm not on this journey to be exhausted, right? And so the goal is not to stay stuck there. The goal is to stop suffering silently because the parents are not okay. But maybe for the first time, we're finally being honest about it because you know what? It's okay to not be okay. And that's a whole nother conversation in itself. So, as always, I want to thank you for joining me for another episode of Learning Curves and Coffee. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with another parent or educator or caregiver who may be quietly carrying more than people realize. And so until next time, keep your coffee strong or your tea strong and your nervous system supported. And remember, you deserve care too. As always, take care of yourself. Bye. This is Learning Curves and Coffee.